again. So we are beginning our live event. So I want to welcome everybody. Hi, it is Friday, and today is the 5th of 5 sessions we've had this week for modern workplace transformation for healthcare and life sciences, but open to all. Today's event is on Microsoft Threat Intelligence. We're going to be taking a look at that, really that guarding the gate, right? How do we protect? Oh, thanks. I have a monitor in the back, and it started playing me in the background. So we have some great speakers for you today. I have Jason Rogers and a colleague or two of his. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. First of all, we love to hear from you during the broadcast. We love to hear who you are, where you're from. We love your questions during and then for Q&A. The way that you can interact with us in the upper right-hand corner of your browser or the Teams client, you will see a little dialog box with a question mark on it. That is the live event Q&A. If you click that, you'll open up the QA panel on the right-hand side. You can post questions. They're all moderated, but I publish those. I'll respond to you as we go. So, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to just give us a shout out, say hello and where you're from. We've had people from London, Brazil, Germany, all over. So we love to hear where you're coming from and post your questions as we go. But without further ado, we've got a great topic around securing the gate to all that data and information. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason and colleagues and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Rogers. I'm the PM lead for Office Advanced Threat Protection, and I am here with Debraj Ghosh, who's the Microsoft Threat Protection Product Manager, and he's going to actually kick it off today and talk about our threat intelligence and automation platforms, and then I'll come back on and talk a little bit about Office ATP and how we do some of those advanced detections.
Great. Thanks, Jason. So my name is Debraj Ghosh. I am the product marketing lead for Microsoft Threat Protection, as Jason mentioned. Feel free to ask questions as we go through the process, and we will either field them during or we will definitely follow up with folks. So before we get into a deep dive into the products, we wanted to sort of set the tone for what we see in the cybersecurity landscape today. So what we see overall in the industry is 3 main challenges. We see that obviously more sophisticated and newer threats are being launched every single day, and that actually requires greater sophistication in the products that help protect your organization. We also see that security experts are in short supply, so you actually really need to have services that can sort of take on a lot of the responsibility that is left over because of the fact that we don't have as many folks who are experts in the cybersecurity field. So you need to have strong products that can fill that gap. And because of the fact that everything is becoming much more digitized, we are seeing that almost anything can be hacked, and therefore almost anything can be an entry point for an attack today. And this next slide sort of alludes to this. What we see today is because of the fact that most organizations are going through their digital transformation, the breadth and depth of the digital estate is growing. And so what we are seeing now is that there's an expansion of what we call the attack surface, and we're going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide as well. We see an expansion of this attack surface, and as we see this expansion of the attack surface, we simply see more entry points for modern threats. And therefore, it's very, very important to have holistic end-to-end protection across all these different points of attack. Now, in Microsoft Threat Protection, which is what the topics of today are, they actually roll up into that broader solution. Microsoft Threat Protection really is addressing 3 main challenges. First, the main challenge is, as I alluded to earlier, the growing sophistication and volume of the threat landscape. And everything we're going to talk about today really will address that first challenge that we see our customers face. Next, we see that the digital estate continues to expand. And we're going to talk about automation, and automation is really one of the key ways that we're helping with that challenge. When you have automation, you can actually simplify the tasks of the analysts because a lot of the things are going to be automated, and therefore analysts actually have greater time to focus more on the more challenging problems, where automation will take care of a lot of the problems that are more mundane, so to speak, or more simple to actually address. Finally, what we see is because of this digital transformation, there is now an incessant amount of signal. There's trillions of threat signals that organizations pick up every single day. However, signal is essentially just noise if there's no intelligence behind it and if there's no way to correlate that signal. And so Microsoft Threat Protection, and especially threat intelligence, which we're going to talk about first, really does a great job of correlating that signal and providing you with intelligence so that you can actually take actions that are based on insights that can actually help you protect your environment. Everything we talk about today is based on what we call the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph. I believe many folks on the phone on this call may already be aware of what the security graph is, but essentially the security graph is the foundational element for all the security products at Microsoft. Everything is really based off this graph. The graph does a few main things. First of all, you can see that the graph provides us with that threat signal. So it's rich and deep in threat signal, but also very important is that it has a wide variety of different signals. And as you can see here, we look at 400 billion emails. We're looking at 1.2 billion devices that are scanned every single month. We see 450 billion authentications, for example. So there's a diversity in the signal as well as a depth of that signal. Now, the intelligence security graph is also where we have a lot of our machine learning algorithms. And therefore, what we can do is we can take all of that signal, and this is where we can actually correlate that signal, and we can actually make it an intelligent signal. Remember, just having signal is not enough because it would just be a lot of noise. What you would need to do is actually take that signal, make sense out of it, and then you can actually apply that learning. And finally, what the intelligence security graph does, it's very similar to the correlation. It also stitches together all the services that make up security at Microsoft. So what we can do with the intelligence security graph powering it is that if, for example, you see a threat on the endpoint, that information is immediately shared with Office 365, for example, and then we can pick up that similar threat if it comes in through email as an attachment or as a link. So that ability to share signal is also another powerful element of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph. Now, as I mentioned, the services we're going to talk about today make up Microsoft Threat Protection, and Microsoft Threat Protection really is a way to secure the modern desktop. I'm sorry, not the modern desktop, the modern workplace. And the modern workplace really has several different attack vectors. And so therefore, what we do with Microsoft Threat Protection is really protect those attack vectors. So we see attacks coming in from identities. So basically your users and admins, their credentials, for example. We see attacks on the endpoint. We see attacks on user data, which for us in Office 365 is email and documents. We can see attacks coming in through cloud apps, and then also attacks coming in through the infrastructure. And as you'll see in the next slide, Microsoft Threat Protection actually has services that address each one of these attack vectors and actually can help mitigate threats impacting any one of these attack vectors. And as you can see, all of this is tied together with this rich strength of signal. In fact, we actually analyze 6.5 trillion signals every single day. So that's a trillion with a T. And so therefore, you can actually see the volume of information that we are applying to actually help protect us against these real-world threats. Now, what we're going to focus on today as part of our discussion are the three boxes that are highlighted. But as you can see, the broader Microsoft Threat Protection solution includes a variety of different services. And the way to look at this is in this checkerboard format, for example, the three that are highlighted plus, for example, Windows Defender ATP, that would actually be used to secure your user data. And so therefore, what we are doing now is we are combining different services to help protect you against and secure you against attacks to any specific attack vector. And those are the attack vectors that I pointed out in the previous slide. So in this case, we are protecting ourselves and securing our user data by leveraging Office 365 ATP, threat intelligence, Exchange Online protection, and also Windows Defender, even though that's out of scope for this discussion today. Now, just to wrap up this section, the way to think about Microsoft Threat Protection is, for those of you in the security field, you're very familiar with the mantra of protect, detect, and respond. So Microsoft Threat Protection is designed to protect against attacks. It's also, however, and just as critical, designed to detect quickly when breaches occur, and then also respond and remediate to those breaches should they occur. And all of this is wrapped together with this ability to actually offer user education and training. And we actually have a feature, a feature within Office 365 Threat Intelligence, which is called Attack Simulator, which actually can help launch simulated attacks on your end users, and therefore you can actually help educate and train them against modern threats as well. And all of this together are really the functional elements of Microsoft Threat Protection. And one of the other real key pieces of Microsoft Threat Protection is that it's designed to really help modern organizations. If you talk to many of your customers today, you'll see that this is essentially their IT layout for security. They have these multiple disjointed and complex products. Each one of them is a point product that does one specific thing. There's really no correlation of signal. There's really nothing that weaves it together. So you actually may find out that there was an attack on your email, but you have no idea of how that may have impacted the rest of your IT environment. What Microsoft Threat Protection does is it unifies all of that signal. It basically connects all the dots for you, and it provides you with the ability to see what's going on across your entire environment, and you can actually take actions based on a knowledge of the full end-to-end scope of today's threats, and then ultimately provide your organization with optimal security and reducing and minimizing really the complexity of the IT environment. So let's now sort of dig into the Office 365 threat intelligence piece. Let's walk through the reality of today's security teams first and sort of give some background of why this threat intelligence service is so important and why some of these features that we're going to talk about today are so important. What we have found, and this is based on all the conversations we've had with our customers, so every single service that we're going to talk about today has been designed and built through dozens and dozens of customer conversations where we sort of go through the iteration process of the product as we have each of these customer conversations. So we continuously improve based on what we hear from our customers. And so what we hear today is that there's inadequate security. However, despite the fact that the security is inadequate, there's also very limited time. And there's really, really not great elements in the security services that provide the ability to detect and remediate. So this is where today's teams, the security teams, really struggle. They don't have enough quality security. They don't have the time to actually help mitigate all the threats they see. And they certainly don't have the time to actually be able to detect and remediate everything that's impacting their environment. And if you think about the day in the life of a security team, this is really what you see. You can see that there are security alerts that they have to deal with. They have to then do an analysis of those alerts. And we're looking at it in the context of email at the bottom. So you can see those fine points for email. But imagine this could be any threat. If it was a threat on the endpoint, those elements at the bottom, those little talking points would actually just be different and they'd be focusing on the endpoint. In terms of investigation, you have to investigate the scope of the threat. And then, of course, you have to assess what kind of impact a threat has had once it's entered the environment. And then once you can actually do those four things, then you can actually begin the process of containing the impact of that threat and then actually responding to remove that threat and get back to a point before that threat actually had any impact. This is where we think you can see how complex and how important the day of the life of a security team officer is, because this is really what they have to do, not just all day long, but every single threat is requiring this entire chain and process. So you can see how complicated things can be. Imagine if you only have 3 threats. Those 3 threats would actually have to go through this entire process for them to actually go end to end and solve for that threat. And so this is where we think automation will play a key role. Automation can really address those issues that we talked about, which is they can actually help reduce the burden, they can actually help reduce the time, and they can actually help reduce the fact that there may be a skill shortage, but you may need less people when you actually have more automation in the team. So even though there's a skills shortage, having automation can really help fill that gap, because now you're actually allowing the service itself to do a lot of that work that maybe having to find an extra individual would have been doing. So we're going to walk through a scenario of automated detection, investigation, and remediation. And we're going to talk about it from the lens of Microsoft Threat Protection. In this example, we're really combining several different products, including Windows Defender ATP, Office ATP, and Office Threat Intelligence. We actually had Forrester do a study recently of Office 365 Threat Intelligence. And this study, these data points that I'm showing you right now, was actually done before any of these automation capabilities were launched. So all of the new things that I'm going to talk about today, that's stuff that's actually going to be in product starting in a month. But these were the types, this was the type of impact we were providing even before this automation was available in Microsoft Threat Intelligence. So that's very important to realize that this product was already providing these types of benefits before these additional capabilities that we're going to spend some time on today have even launched. So imagine now what all these new things are going to be able to do once we actually launch them in the next month. So what Forrester actually found was that 89.3% of the reduction in investigation and remediation times were offered through the threat intelligence service with just manual remediation capabilities and manual search capabilities. Also, what they found, and this was basically done by what they did was they did a survey of several hundred customers of different sizes, and what they did was they looked at also some interviews of actual customers, and they actually called them and talked to them as well. And what they found was 96% of these customers felt that Office 365 Threat Intelligence enabled them to better understand risks, and they felt that 94% of these customers felt that there was better protection for their users. Now, we just looked at it from the security lens. Imagine now how we can quantify this in terms of the amount of dollars saved by an IT team. What Forrester actually also did was they created these models where they looked at an organization that has about 6,000 mailboxes. And from those 6,000 mailboxes, they were able to actually extrapolate through their modeling how much money and time we could save based on these different criteria. So for example, just by consolidating into one service that does all this stuff, you could save almost $700,000. The savings from the ability to remediate with Office 365 Threat Intelligence was almost $2 million. Less downtime, which was a little bit more than $1 million in savings, and ultimately just lower impact on the business. That could be a multitude of different things, and that actually was greater than $300,000 in savings. And once again, this is obviously a mathematical model, but this was based on all the interviews and all the assessments that Forrester actually did when they created this study. What they were also able to do is calculate an ROI and NPV. So you can actually see that the ROI was 186% when they procured Office 365 Threat Intelligence. The net present value is about 2.7 million, and the payback happens in about 6 months. You can definitely see that it's very rapid payback, and it's very, very extensive in the time, in the amount of return you get on this investment, as well as the amount of money you are saving from this investment. Now imagine we add this additional layer of automation. So what we just talked about in terms of that study for Forrester was before any of these automated capabilities that we're going to talk about actually launched. So now what we're doing is we're adding all of these different automated capabilities in Office 365 Threat Intelligence. And when we do so, we are actually now able to really improve the capabilities of something that's already a very, very powerful service. So we're basically going to now also add these other elements. So you can see that all of these elements really show how Office 365 Threat Intelligence is offering capabilities across the board for that entire day in the life of a security analyst. So let's talk a little bit about what we consider to be security playbooks, and that's really the foundational element. And you'll see that these security playbooks are foundational in every single aspect of automation and Microsoft Threat Protection. And it's really at the heart of everything that we talk about when it comes to automation. So essentially, what is a security playbook? It's these admin policies. They're designed on real world scenarios, and that's where we really leverage that strength of signal, because the more we've seen, the more powerful our capabilities of solving for them are. And then we automatically apply intelligent response based on the fact that we've done this several times, and our analysts have actually solved for these threats manually for a long time. And now we're actually taking that knowledge and making those processes automated. So when I look at the security playbook, this is sort of a breakdown of one example. The framework that I'm showing you is very similar no matter what security playbook you have. The actual elements in this case might be different because I'm actually using a specific example. For those of you who are familiar with Office 365 or Outlook, you may know that there's this feature called the report message feature. What we are now doing is that we're going to turn the report message feature. If you have Office 365 Threat Intelligence, for example, when someone reports a message, that will actually be an automated policy for an entire investigation and remediation scenario that we will actually be launching. So basically, in this case, there's a trigger for every single one of these security playbooks, and there's a trigger that actually launches the whole thing. In this case, the trigger is when someone submits a message that is malicious or that they think is malicious to Microsoft. And then once the email is submitted, the rest of the automated playbook and the security playbook sort of kicks in. So each security playbook has sort of a root investigation. And you can see we investigate different aspects here. Then we actually go through this entire phase of hunting. We now expand to different clusters. We share signal to the platform. We assess in this case. And once again, this is very detailed for this specific playbook, but imagine the framework being investigation, hunting, and remediation. Those are really the 3 steps that'll go into any security playbook, regardless of what that actual playbook actually does. So in this case, you're actually seeing that we go through this entire process of investigation, this entire set of hunting, and then obviously the final remediation steps. All of this together really is what each of is the foundation of the security playbooks, and you can see the type of rigor that's applied in each one of these security playbooks. And when we launch the automation services in the next month or so in Office 365, we will actually be launching it with 4 of these security playbooks, and then we'll be expanding to 8. And then we'll also then expand to to allow you to customize your own playbooks. So you can actually see how powerful this feature is going to become. For those of you who are using Windows Defender, you may be already familiar with this concept of the security playbooks and the automated response. In fact, a lot of this is very similar. In Windows Defender ATP, for example, there's 150 security playbooks that are all working together to help actually with automated response. Here we're looking at the investigation graph. This investigation graph is actually showing you some of the, it's basically a graphical display of a security playbook. You can see here there's the trigger, and then some of the action steps in the hunting phase, and then the remediation steps down here. And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in the next step.
And real quickly, we did have 2 questions. One of them was asking the playbooks availability for use.
So they'll become, so there will be, let me answer this in 2 different questions. So, because I'm not fully sure I understand the full aspect of the question.
Sure.
The playbooks will become live. First of all, there will be a set of 4 that become live in the next month in Office 365. If you have, for example, E5 or Threat Intelligence, you'll see 4 of them. Then about a month or 2 later, we'll release the next 4. And then finally, you'll also have the ability to customize playbooks. So you'll actually be able to create your own playbooks based on specific scenarios that may be impacting your environment.
Awesome. The other question, real quickly, this went back to near the beginning, but they asked, are the simulated events similar to penetration testing like in Azure? And where does this need to be? Where do you schedule an event like this with Microsoft?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So, yeah, it's it. Well, I'll read it exactly. Are the simulated events similar to penetration testing like in Azure, where this needs to be a scheduled event with Microsoft?
No, you can drive this entirely yourself. So inside of the Security Compliance Center, there's under threat protection, there's something called Attack Simulator, and you can actually launch a bunch of different kinds of attacks. So the one that's probably most familiar to folks would be a phishing email simulation. So you can send emails out that that have phishing lures to to whoever you want to in your organization, and see how they respond. But we've gone beyond that too. I mean, you can do things like password spray attacks. I think eventually we're building out more and more. I don't know how many there are today, but I think there are like about a dozen that are going to land eventually.
Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, and wait, we got one more. Maybe I missed this. Oh, not the when the playbooks will be released, but where. Where do we go to find them?
So they'll be part of Office 365 E5, and they sit in the Threat Intelligence service.
So right in the admin area for Threat Intelligence.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So when you set up, and it'll be a policy you can actually set when you have like Office 365 E5, you'll be able to go into the admin portal and set up policies, and in the policies you'll actually see that's where the playbooks are.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we're going to walk you through an example of this automated response. And let me actually go back one slide. Here you can see this example actually takes elements of a lot of different services. In fact, it actually also includes Azure Active Directory and Azure ATP, which is actually not marked here, but it really talks about all of these things together. So now what I'm in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. Here, I'm looking at these alerts, and you can see that there's a variety of different alerts. And these are alerts, you can see here that they've been resolved. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig into this first alert and sort of get some understanding from it. So if I click on the first alert, I can see that this is basically talking about the malicious mail removed from Office 365. You can see that it's been resolved. But what I can now do is, now that I've seen this, I can actually dig a little bit deeper. So I can close this and I can actually go and find out what actually happened in this case, because obviously it seems like this was a big deal. It was marked as high. So as an admin, I may want to find out more about it. So I'm going to close this. And what I did now is I scrolled down to this node here. It says threat intelligence, and I go below and I can see investigations. What I've done is now I've opened up that investigation window for that specific alert. So here it says malicious mail detected and removed by Office 365. Once again, you're now seeing a manifestation of that security playbook, and it's this graphical view. You can see here that there was this automated investigation triggered. So this was the malicious email that was detected and removed. From there, you can see that there were a total of 4 alerts that actually made up this entire trigger. And now what you see are the different responses from that trigger point. So now we're actually looking at different clusters of emails that we're investigating. We're looking at different users who may have been impacted by this. And we're also looking at machines that may have been impacted by this. And so what we're now looking at is, if you remember in the security playbook, you have that root investigation where we start looking at different aspects. And this is really where we start hunting. We're going beyond just the email phase. We're now looking at the users. We're looking at the machines. And you can see here, we're getting very granular details on, hey, we discovered 6 emails that were phish. We discovered 5 emails that had malware. And what we have done is we actually looked at 23 different emails. Based on our intelligence, we looked at 23 different emails that we thought could have been suspicious. And in fact, of those 23, 11 turned out to be bad. Similarly, we looked at 5 different users who were suspicious to us. And we found out anomalous behavior, and very detailed anomalous behavior from those different users. We also then looked at our machines, and we found that there were 2 machines. Now, once again, this is really Microsoft threat protection. We talked about that signal correlation and how we apply intelligence in that signal correlation to really get important elements out. So this is assuming that you actually have Windows Defender ATP, you have Azure ATP and Microsoft Cloud App Security here for the users, as well as Azure Active Directory. And then, of course, here you're using Office 365 ATP. So this is happening because you have all those Microsoft Threat Protection services all working together under Microsoft Threat Protection, and that's how you're getting all this rich signal, which is also very intelligent signal. Now that you've seen all these different elements, you can actually see that we found these different threats, and we were actually then able to take these automated remediation steps for each one of these different threats. If I want to dig a little deeper into these alerts, I'm looking at these different alerts, and I see that once again, I'm surfacing signal from different parts of my organization. So I'm looking at Exchange, I'm looking at AAD, I'm actually looking at SharePoint. This is coming from Cloud App Security, this signal. And so I am actually now, once again, getting rich signal, but it's also very intelligent signal. So I actually know the source, I know what's going on. It's very contextual. Here I'm looking at the emails that were part of this threat, and I'm looking at different clusters that we actually examined. And I actually see here that this cluster, this was the URL, this was the IP sender, and then the subject. And so all of this is actually part of it. And now I'm looking at the different users that were also involved in this as well. And so once again, I'm getting good information from the different users. Also very important is I get all the log files for each of these. And what you can see from all the different log files is that from here, I can actually now ingest these into a SIM if I want to. but I basically have all this rich signal. So we have something called the Office 365 API, the activity API, and all these logs actually funnel into that API, which can then connect to any SIM. So you actually have this rich set of information that you can actually put into your SIM and then get more details if you want from there. Now, we also highlighted the machines, of course. And so what I can do from here, and this is once again where the power of that intelligent security graph, which unifies the signal, but then also connects all the different aspects and elements of Microsoft Threat Protection. I can actually then see that there's these compromised devices. I can double click on one of the machines. And if I do that, if I double click on the machine, I am now taken to Windows Defender ATP, where you actually see that same type of investigation graph. And now what's happened is that an investigation is launched into my endpoint ecosystem. And now I'm actually looking at all the different endpoints that were impacted, and I'm seeing that all these entities were already analyzed on the endpoint. The threats were found, and they've also been remediated. So with one service and one solution, which is Microsoft Threat Protection, I've actually now protected myself across all of Office 365, my cloud apps, as well as my endpoints. So that's really the power of having everything under one umbrella of security, where you actually can get visibility into every single layer of security in your organization that's protecting all those different attack vectors. So this is really one of the powerful examples of how Microsoft Threat Protection works together across all these different elements of security. And now Windows Defender ATP also has these logs, which can be ingested into your environment. And once again, this connects to a SIM, and you can actually take it and then look at this. We're going to walk through another quick example, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jason. In this case, this is another example. In this case, there's a weaponized URL. Let me give you the background of this. So imagine that an email has come in, and a person clicks on a URL. Now, what happens is while we are, in many cases, Office 365 ATP will detonate that URL. That detonation takes about 45 seconds. And so in that time, this first user can actually go to that web page. And what has happened is that their credentials have been harvested because it was actually going to a bad web page. What we are actually doing here is this is basically a patient zero scenario where they have actually taken this URL, they clicked on it. We found out as soon as we did the detonation, within 45 seconds, we found out that it was a weaponized URL. However, we did have one person who got compromised because that was patient zero. But what we're going to show you is that with the power of Microsoft Threat Protection, it's built for the fact that there could be compromises, because everyone knows that sometimes bad things do get in. It's really how quickly you can address when that happens and how quickly you can get back to point zero before anything bad happened to anyone. So same scenario, I'm going to dig into this, and now I'm looking at this graph here. Obviously, these elements are different because it's a different alert. I can see that the trigger here was as soon as we discovered that weaponized URL. Once again, we detonate suspicious URLs. In this case, we detonate the URL. We found out from the detonation results that this was a bad link, and we can see now what's happened here is it says intra-org phish. So what happened was this one user was compromised, and as is typical when that happens, that compromised account was then used for lateral movement in the organization, where that person the bad actor was then using that person's account to launch other phish emails across the organization. So you see intra-org phish. So here we see the users that were investigated. Here we see the machines once again, and you can actually see in this case, we actually had different threats that were found, and once again, remediation steps taken. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We see the alerts once again. We see that we looked at the different clusters of emails. In this case, we found that the top cluster actually had phish, while the bottom cluster actually was clean. So we actually took action on that top cluster. Actually, let me go back here one sec. You can see here that we found 6 emails that were bad. So these are the intra-org phish, and we actually have already deleted them. And when we look at the emails here, we see that of these emails, this is actually what happened, where we found those emails. These were the ones that were sent from that compromised user account, and they were actually delivered. But you can remember that we already took the response step of deleting them. So what we are showing you here is that from that compromised account, we were able to see where these emails were sent, and also already took the action to delete. And then we have the risk indicators and the service that it came from, as well as, once again, the logs. And if we wanted to, we can hop over to Windows Defender ATP and look at the one endpoint that was impacted, and same result here. And once again, we have the full rich set of logs. So sort of to summarize the piece on automation, Once again, we believe that this really addresses the concern of the digital estate broadening, because as you can see, when you have more automation, you can actually have a lot of those response and remediation capabilities done for you, so that you can spend more time doing maybe more challenging aspects of security. So automation is for better detection and response ultimately, and you can actually see that it can actually help secure that broad attack surface, detect and remediate quickly, and then ultimately enhances your overall security because you're actually spending more time working on the things that are even more challenging than what we can solve with automation. All right, now I'm going to pass it over to Jason. Thank you all very much for your time.
And we do have a couple of questions real quickly. So the first one was going back, it said, do they go, I guess this is when they find attackers as Microsoft detects them, do we go hunting for them to put them out of business? That was the first.
So are you asking at a Microsoft level, or are you asking?
Yeah, that's what they're asking.
So we have our own dedicated security ops and analysts.
Yep.
So to be honest with you, I actually don't know if we actively go seek them out, but I think if we find a massive threat and we can actually identify the attacker, I would think that our security operations folks actually notify the right folks so that they can take the next step.
We do actually have an organization within Microsoft that we work with called our digital crime unit. They would be the ones that would actually go off, and they would be the tip of the spear to go out and then go after those folks and work with law enforcement to try to shut them down. And so we have a relationship with them, but the O365 service doesn't really go off and do that ourselves.
Correct. The next was, can different types of alerts be sent to different people so one person is not overwhelmed? And also, can these events, when you're triggering things, events, around alerting, can that trigger a Microsoft flow?
So for when you're creating alert policies, I think you can customize how you get those alerts. So from the perspective of the queue, no. From the perspective of who gets sent the alert, the answer is yes. Right now, we do not have flow integration, but it's certainly something that we talk about a lot. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, cool. And then last, other than them saying this looks very good, so compliments, there was one last question. Will there be a package of materials around all this that partners can use in presentations to customers?
Can you, like, when you say package of materials, you mean like demo environments and things like that, or
either that or PowerPoints, collateral, right? That they can.
Yeah, so I think this PowerPoint should be available to partners. I think you should be able to already get this. We are working on creating some demos on this automation, which should also be available to our field as well as partners at some point. That's still a little bit slower, but we're progressing on that as well. The only thing is it's a little bit hard to simulate some of these because you actually have to have the right triggers and everything that starts the automation. But yes, we are working towards it. We also we should have this deck should be actually available. If it's not, just shoot me an email and I can talk to Nati, who I think. Do you work with Nati by any chance? I'm asking.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay. Well, so he's our partner program product manager. So I think they have access to this deck. So therefore, they should be able to get to this. But yes, we are working on some other collateral to help our partners with this as well.
Excellent. And that's all the questions for right now. Thank you.
All right, great. So I'll transition a little bit now, and we're gonna try to deep dive specifically into how we actually protect Office 365. So how we protect your email, how we protect your documents by leveraging the advanced detections in Office ATP. And when we'll also go through some of the core protections built into Exchange Online protection. So I don't think I need to tell anybody on this call that it's a scary world out there and it gets scarier every day. But it is interesting to look at some of these statistics. We still see an overwhelming number of cyber attacks starting with email. So 91%. I think I personally believe we're going to see a shift away from that a little bit as we continue to get better and better at stopping these attacks through email. We'll see things start to pop up in other places, messaging apps and file sharing services. But right now, primarily cyber attacks are still coming in through email. Now, the kind of the rate of churn on these attacks is getting faster and faster and faster. So you'll see URLs that only live for a few minutes. You'll see URLs that get weaponized, post delivery, and they'll be bad for 3 minutes, and then they'll be good for 10 minutes, and then they'll be bad for 3 minutes. So the bad guys, they have access to our protections. They're trying to get around our protections, and so we're in this constant kind of chess game and battle to try to outsmart them. The thing that is terrifying to me is the 5 minutes and 20% of click stats. So within 5 minutes, 20% of the links contained inside of phishing emails actually get clicked on. Now, that is an astonishingly high rate compared to, say, the number of clicks on a link inside of a spam mail or even a bulk mail. So these are really convincing social engineering attacks, and the click-through rates are incredibly high. So training is super important to try to get that down as low as possible. However, you're never going to get full protection of your organization just based on a training regime. And then, of course, once a breach actually happens, the stuff that Debraj just went through is wildly important. So knowing that it happened and being able to remediate it quickly, super important, because most of the time, the attackers are able to linger and harvest information for a very long time before anybody even realizes they're there. Now, what you see in the graph in the upper right-hand corner is from 2015. And this is these are like the antiquated days of malicious attacks at this point. But this is a real attack that we saw in Office 365. So each color on that graph represents a different variant. So they were taking the same basic piece of malware and they were morphing the file. And so each one of those different colors represents a different morph. And you can kind of see that it's volumes are fairly modest, and the attack kind of unfolded over a long period of time, and it fairly slowly morphed. So this is something that we potentially could have caught with traditional AV. This is the same thing in late 2016. So volumes have gotten incredibly high. Simultaneous morphs are getting sent out at the same time. There's simply no way, and the total attack duration was like 10 minutes. There's just no way you're ever going to catch this with traditional AV. You have to have something like ATP that does behavioral analysis, is able to catch a piece of malware the very first time it's seen. So it's not just the way that attacks are unfolding has gotten more sophisticated. The attacks themselves have gotten much more complex, and it's never one thing anymore. It's not, back in 2015 when we saw that first attack, or before 2015, people would send executables through email, and I mean, it would just be the malware would come to you as an attachment, and some percentage of the people would click on it and it'd get infected. Those days are long gone. So we're seeing some really complicated layered approaches to trying to get through our defenses. So Trojans, inside of Office documents that are obfuscated, that are rapidly morphing. Combinations of things like we'll see links in emails that point to a Word doc, and then once that Word doc gets downloaded, the Word doc is actually weaponized, and then the doc may reach out to a C2 server and download the actual malicious payload. So having a really layered approach to protection is really important. And then also we're seeing these combinations of malware and phishing attacks. So it could be, phishing used to be just credential harvesting, but now it's really about, using social engineering, using the phishing techniques to get malware on your box as well. So we'll see in Adobe, an Acrobat or a PDF file that looks like it's being protected by DocuSign and getting you to click on that link. And then, like I said, that link brings down something that looks like it's the real document, but really that's the Trojan that gives you the that drops the malicious thing on your machine. So it's gotten incredibly complicated. So this shows the EOP ATP stack, and this was what we originally built to protect your email, and that's its primary purpose. Now we've built a bunch of additional tech based on this to protect other attack vectors as well that leverages pieces of this environment. And so I'll walk through some of that as well. But the great thing about ATP as a tool is it really is natively integrated into the Exchange Online Protection stack. It's integrated into Office 365. So to enable it is just a couple of clicks. It's very, very easy to do. There's no exotic, you have to route your MX record some other way, or you have to, give some third-party access to your mailbox or anything like that. There's a policy, you click it on, and you just, decide who you want to protect, and we just start protecting. Let us know what you want us to do when we find something bad. So the boxes here that are the dash boxes, those are things that are natively included in Exchange Online Protection, and then the things that are in the dark blue boxes, the solid boxes, are the ones that are part of Office Advanced Threat Protection. And this shows kind of the logical order of execution of these different technologies. So we start off with basic edge filtering, where we look at sender reputation, IP reputation, and even recipient delivery volumes, and we're able to peel off a huge amount just at the edge. So we're able to drop half of all bad content at the edge just from those kind of basic things. Then once something makes it past our edge, we run it through those traditional AV scanners. So I just spent the last 10 minutes telling you how traditional AV doesn't work. Well, that's not entirely true. It works incredibly well on things that are from 2 days ago or a day ago. And so that allows us to really peel off something like of that additional stuff that comes past the edge. We're able to drop 85% of malware using our AV scanners. All that commodity stuff we're able to get rid of, all the stuff that we've already seen. Now, we look at the file and we take multiple hashes of it. So we'll take a straight SHA-256 hash of the file that allows us to uniquely identify, but then we also do something called polymorphic hashing. So we'll look at active content within the file and we'll hash that. So if we've got somebody's developed a macro that drops an executable onto your desktop, that they may morph the container that macro is in, but they're a lot less likely to morph the macro itself. It's much harder to do. And so we're able to identify that same active content is contained inside of a bunch of different documents as well. So these reputation checks allow us to go, okay, if there's something that we found through an ATP sandbox analysis, then we're able to take that and leverage it across the entire service. And so you'll see that reputation pop up in a bunch of different places. But kind of the most basic one is if we've seen this file before and we know that it's bad, then we'll just block it outright. And that's for everybody, whether it's ATP, non-ATP. Then we have heuristic clustering ML. So it's just based on delivery patterns, we can become highly suspicious that mail is bad. So, just based on we see a spike in a particular polymorphic hash that's of a particular type that's going to a disparate set of user. We can mesh that all together and become suspicious of that entire cluster. So we'll pause the cluster in that case. And once again, this is base EOP value. We'll take a sample from that cluster and we'll run it through our sandbox environment, just like we would for safe attachments for ATP, and make a determination, is it good or is it bad? And then if it's bad, we'll drop the whole cluster. Now, at this point, we start doing ATP anti-fish analysis. So we've got a set of ML models. There's actually, I think, 9 of them now, but they kind of fall into these 3 basic categories of doing analysis on URLs contained inside the email, doing analysis on the body content itself inside the mail, and then doing an analysis on header information contained inside the mail. So, connecting information. And so we're able to detect a bunch of fish just based on, on that artificial intelligence that we've developed. Then we move into specific anti-spoofing and anti-personation technologies. So when someone is trying to pretend that they're you, we're able to detect that. So, leveraging what we know about your organization, what we know about your sending patterns, and then doing an analysis on the P1 and P2 senders, we're able to make a determination that somebody is trying to pretend that they're somebody in your organization, and they're really not. Then we run through our traditional anti-spam stack, where we're primarily looking for more spammy thing, content-based. It's very rules-based, some ML. And then we move back into ATP with safe attachments. And so what safe attachments does, and this is really the core of ATP, we spin up a series of hypervisors unique to this one attachment. And we open up the attachment inside of these multiple hypervisors, and we start to poke at it. So we pretend that we're a user. We try to mimic the end user environment. So we mimic your desktop environment, and we pretend like we're a user, and we wait for that thing to do something bad to the environment. So it's not so much a detecting bad content in the attachment itself. It's seeing what the attachment does to the environment. So it'll reach out to a C2 server and download something that's non-malicious. So that's an example. It'll try to encrypt the hard drive, right? Obviously, super easy for us to detect. It'll try to persist itself. It'll mess with the registry in a weird way. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. We also look for things attempting to evade the fact that they're inside of a sandbox. So now when people are developing these pieces of malware, they'll actually do things like GeoIP lookups. That's my personal favorite. They'll go and they'll say, what IP am I in right now, and does that happen to be co-located with a data center of a known security vendor? And so when they do things like that, it's a great red flag for us that this thing is likely malicious. Then based on, once again, coming back to that reputation, when we find something in safe attachments, and we take it, we add the polymorphic hashes and add those SHA-256 hashes back into our reputation service. But we also do something called 0-hour auto purge. So we'll go and look across every mailbox in Office 365. And if we've delivered a mail that contains a known bad URL or a known bad attachment, we'll actually take those mails and try to pull them out of the inbox and get them into junk mail folders. So we'll actually go back and find things that we potentially missed. And so, one scenario where this shows up is, like I said, a lot of people will weaponize URLs post-delivery. So somebody may weaponize a URL, after they've delivered it, we figure out that URL was bad. We know that there's 100,000 mails that were delivered when it was good, but now it's bad. We can actually go and try to get those mails out of the user's inbox. And that same scenario also gets protected by safe links. So some of those users are going to have clicked on that URL and potentially have compromised their credentials or downloaded something malicious. So when you have safe links, we actually wrap all of the URLs inside of the emails, inside of our wrapper that points to our reputation server. So we'll go off, and when you click on that link, we'll check, is it a good link or is it a bad link at time of click? So if it's 2 minutes after delivery or if it's 2 years after delivery, we'll still check it and make sure it's good when you click on it. So part of that is for every URL that gets clicked on in mail, we're also doing an asynchronous detonation of that URL. So inside of the same sandbox environment, inside of those same hypervisors that we use for detecting malicious file behavior, we also have built in anti-phishing detections where we'll actually go to the website, we render it as if it's being viewed by a person. It's not static code analysis, and then we do an analysis on that image that's actually generated to make a determination. That I guess the easiest example is, hey, there's a URL that's obviously not a Microsoft login page, but it sure does. We're able to tell that it looks like a Microsoft login page, once it's rendered. And so the reason we do the rendering is that there's a bunch of techniques that attackers will use to try to obfuscate the fact that through static code analysis that this thing is what it's displaying. So you can take an image of a Microsoft logo and slice it up into 1,000 images. But since we're actually rendering the page, and then we take a bunch of pictures of the page and run OCR on it and do photo DNA matching to figure out what's exactly on that page, what the intent of that page is, then we're able to determine if the URL matches what the page should be doing. And so that's that last piece, the time and click sandboxing piece. And so I'm going to pause here for a second because I know that was a lot to swallow.
And we got a lot of questions.
Okay, that's kind of what I was guessing. So
yeah, so this one actually, I think the stream of it is really around a core scenario, and with Teams coming into play, it was a bunch around that. So, and then the back end services and how this might protect because it's not necessarily an email scenario. So they said they imagine inviting a guest to a team and the person has bad intentions or a compromised machine. Can something happen during a chat session like this one, for example? So they're chatting. Is that something that we can protect or that they're open? And they followed up with asking about if you send a corrupted file to the team, would that be, how are we protected in this scenario with that? And I kind of hit on the fact that it's SharePoint in the back end where this is going, and ATP can work with SharePoint as well. And then finally, they had a comment about some type of a table showing different attached methods and which defense layers get activated would be nice. I.e., if we have E3, we get 2 layers. If we have 365, E5, we get 4 layers. Adding AMS adds more, 360 and 365. So kind of a stack. But the whole genesis was around Teams, the services like Exchange and SharePoint behind it, and how does that open up to attack? And what do we do?
We've got some slides on breadth here coming up, but let me just jump kind of to the punchline. So currently we have safe attachments protection in SharePoint. So I guess let me talk about the breadth story more broadly. So in terms of safe attachments, we've got SharePoint protected, and so the way that we do that is kind of opportunistically through known attack vectors. So we don't detonate everything in SharePoint. What we do is we go, we know what a suspicious behavior looks like in SharePoint. When someone shares a file out, for instance, so we'll go off and detonate that file because we know that's potentially something that looks like an attack vector. And so because OneDrive for Business is based on the back end of SharePoint, because Teams is based on the back end of SharePoint, we're able to protect those services in the same way. So in the case of Teams, every file that shows up looks really suspicious to us. By definition, Teams is a platform meant for collaboration and sharing. And so we do a lot of detonation of Teams content. Now, we're in the process of rolling out safe links for Teams as well. So if someone puts a malicious URL into a chat, at time of click on that URL, we'll be able to do the same kind of safe links analysis that we do for a wrapped link inside of emails. Now, the way that works is very similar to the way that we've implemented safe links inside of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. So next kind of breadth play. Inside of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel right now, if you're using Pro Plus clients and you're logged into your O365 account, you've got ATP, we natively provide safe links protection. So the links don't have to be wrapped. The document doesn't have to come through email. It could be something that you've authored on your desktop. It could be something that somebody handed to you on a USB that you downloaded from Dropbox. Doesn't matter. When you click on the link, natively we'll realize that that click event occurred. No wrapping on the URL, no change to the document. And we'll go off and do the same check that we would to safe links inside of email. So that same experience is going to be coming to Teams as well. Any other questions before I move on?
That was it. No, excellent. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some features that have recently been released or about to be released. And so one of the things that we've done inside of Outlook is something that we're calling native link rendering. So we've spent some time on this call talking about user education. One of the drawbacks of really any service that does time of click protection is that you have to change the link in order to do it. So we wrap the link inside of our safe links. When your user hovers over that link, it doesn't really look like the original link. It's confusing to them. A lot of times they'll think it's malicious just because it's us, but it really doesn't let them, look at that link and try to make an informed decision about, is this what I think it is? And so if you're using Enlighten clients, or if you're using our Microsoft clients, when you hover over the link now, you get the experience shown here on this slide, which is, protected by safe links, and then we'll show you the original URL. So all that investment that you've been making in hover training still pays off, investment in education. We've also tried to get a lot more specific on our warning pages within safe links. So, not just saying, hey, this thing is bad, but saying, hey, this is something that your organization wanted us to block. So part of your safe links policy allows you to specifically add URLs that you want us to block, even if we don't necessarily think that they're bad. And so that's a powerful tool for you as well. If you find something that you think is bad, you can immediately block it, and it'll take effect on at time of click. So even if it's a bunch of mails that have already been delivered, you're able to protect your organization. But we'll show your users a dialogue that's specific to that. If we see a URL in an email it's in a message that's similar to other messages that we thought were suspicious, we'll tell you that. So if there's something about the if we think that the message was phished because of some other detection, we're able to say, hey, you clicked on this thing, but we know that because the attributes of this message, it's coming from someone that we think is a known phisher. So even though this URL may not explicitly be bad, be careful. Things like that. So we're really expanding how we're able to interact with the end user through these safe links dialogue. And so this is what we just talked about, securing productivity. This is safe links integration into Office clients specifically, and like I said, Teams is on the way. And that's really what this next slide shows. We've got obviously across all platforms, Teams protection for safe attachments and safe links is coming soon. And that's this link protection inside of Teams. Just talked about it. We've done a lot of work. Debraj walked through what the threat intelligence experience looks like, but we've also done a lot of work to give you more information as if you don't have threat intelligence, if you just have Office ATP. So, we've done a lot of work around providing, alerts and insights, even if you're just an ATP customer, to let you know what's going on in your organization. Then also we've got the threat protection status report that gives you this kind of end-to-end view across the entire stack of what we're catching on what piece of tech. And then we also provide a real-time view similar to what you get in Threat Explorer of everything that we're catching with ATP, just as an ATP customer. We've also done a lot of work on quarantine, and we continue to do a lot of work on quarantine. Something that's not on this deck that is going to be coming out fairly soon, though, is we're going to start allowing customized branding of these things that are end user facing. So things like your safe links block page, things like the spam notifications. You'll be able to put your logo, do some customization to let your users know that this thing is coming from your organization. This shows the real-time reports that I was talking about. It's going to include, or it does include, URL clicks now. So, it allows you to more easily correlate bad stuff that's going on in your organization across all the different types of detections of files and mails, and then also user clicks as well. And then Debraj spoke, I think, briefly to this, but we have, everything that we detect, we push out through the Office 365 management APIs. So if you do want to do SIM integration, we make it pretty easy to do that. That's just an example. And then this is, of course, what Debraj went very deep on, the automated investigation and response. So we've got, looks like 20 minutes or so left. I do have another section on discussing how we think about effectiveness of the product. Maybe I'll pause first and see if there's another round question.
We had one question come in, and one additional, and it was around healthcare industry specific, and they're asking if you have anything specific that's being worked on or being done for healthcare, life sciences. My gut would be that this is more an overall play, not just a vertical, but I'll let you take that.
So most of the pure security work that we're doing applies across verticals. Within the compliance space, that's a very different story. So there's a lot of work going on with things like DLP that would be healthcare specific. Obviously with a HIPAA focus. But in terms of security, we don't see, we may see unique sets of IOCs that are related to specific indicators of compromise that are related to specific industries. But in terms of the tech, there really aren't tech plays that are specific. It's more a technology infra kind of focus, and that tends to be pretty similar across all organizations.
Yeah. And that was the only other question we had.
All right, great. So let me, since we've got a little bit of time, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about effectiveness. So I believe at this point that we have the most effective secure email gateway, and really when I say secure email gateway, I'm extending that to all productivity, beyond email, everything that we've talked about today. But I believe that our core effectiveness within the EOP ATP stack is absolutely the best in the industry, hard stop. And so I realize that that's a kind of a bold statement to make. So I wanted to take a minute and just walk you through how we think about effectiveness, how we measure effectiveness, and why I think that that's true. So obviously it's impossible for us to measure a competitor's catch. But what I can do is I can measure a competitor's miss. And so as every email comes into Office 365, I can tell if that mail is being pre-filtered by one of our competitors. I know if your MX record points to a competitor, I can tell based on connecting IP information if that mail is coming from a competitor's filtering stack. So every mail that gets sent through to us from that competitor, if I can then later assess that that mail contained malicious content, then I know that it's a competitor miss. So if it's something that we catch, or if it's something that we later determine contain malicious content, then I know that it's their miss. And then I can normalize that miss over the overall message volume that we're seeing from each one of our competitors. And then I can do the same exercise for us, and I'll go through how we think about it for us personally, how we think about our own miss, and I can do a comparison. So within our own environment, we look at things that get submitted to us from you as potential misses. We have our own set of AI that goes off and hunts for FNs and FPs in our system. We do something that we call rescan. So everything that comes through our system for a number of days afterwards, we're constantly rescanning it through our stacks. You remember I told you that AV, so as a simple example, I guess, AV engines are really, really good at catching things that are 2 days old. Well, we keep running it through AV engines for 2 days to see if we catch anything that had previously gone through our stack. And then we also have a bunch of intelligence. So we've got intelligence from other services within Microsoft. We've got a bunch of third-party intelligence that we buy. And so we use that also to identify things that potentially we missed. And so we take all of those messages that we think might be misses from all of those sources, and then we extract information from that mail. So URLs are obviously easy things to trigger off of. File hashes, we talked a lot about that and how we can use that to identify clusters across 365, but we also look at things like message fingerprints and information about the headers. We pull a bunch of metadata out, and then we use that to identify what other messages across O365 might be part of that miss cluster. So in that way, we're able to really actively go off and find everything that we potentially missed. And so before I get to the kind of the punchline of how we stacked up, I guess I want to talk a little bit about how people typically evaluate our service versus other services. It's incredibly challenging to do, and here's why. There's, a lot of times people will try to use synthetic malware or set up specific kind of like testing environments and send some honeypot through. Really, the only way to evaluate one of these services is to actually use it on real Mailflow, and just see how it protects you. And the reason why is there are a bunch of pieces of the stack that require a real sender to be part of Mailflow. So if you're taking mail that you're already running through an existing provider and you're bifurcating it to us and trying to run it through, now all of a sudden that mail looks like it's coming from not who it's really coming from, but from somebody else. So things like our anti-spoof technology, things like edge filtering, or heuristic clustering technology, like all of that requires actual real live mail flow in order to really shine. And then the same thing applies to kind of the back end of the stack, where we're never going to, if it's not a real user that you're sending mail to, there's nothing for us to detect in terms of anti-impersonation. If nobody is clicking on those links, then safe links is never going to come into play. So these kind of common methods that people use to evaluate are really, really challenging. Anytime that you're trying to do these kind of bifurcated or inline synthetic kind of scenarios, just be aware that they're incredibly complicated to do right, and you're likely only to exercise a portion of the stack. So real users, real mail flow, get a trial, try out the service. That's the way to really find out how it's going to work for you. Now, this shows our top 3 competitors, and the reason that I chose this time frame is, there was a shift in kind of that December 2017, November 2017 timeframe where there was a big shift from malware to phish. Now we're seeing it come back a little bit towards malware, but there was this huge shift towards fish. And if you've been paying attention to our product releases, a bunch of our anti-fish stack, a lot of the enhancements that we made really weren't rolling out until March or April kind of time frame. So what this shows is the effective miss rate between us and our competitors. So early on in the year, we were not as good as the top three, for sure. Like, this clearly shows that. Once we landed our full fish stack, once we fully tuned it, that story changed dramatically. So doing the exact same measurement later in the year, once that stack landed, heading into this fall, you can see dramatic improvement in us over our competitors in terms of minimizing miss rate. And I'm guessing there's going to be a few more questions after that.
I had, well, one person said they were double booked. Thanks for organizing this and great speakers. The other, though, asked, is Cisco one of these competitors?
After long discussions with legal, I was told I couldn't identify who these competitors were, but I will tell you that Cisco does not fall on our top 3 list.
There we go.
This is top 3 by competitor volume. So we actually, I'm showing top 3 here. We actually look at top 12, so we do look at Cisco internally, but I'm just showing the top 3 here.
So when we talk about the top 3, not to be named, they are not one of those.
Correct.
There we go. That's the only question I had, other than this is great.
Okay, anything, that's all I had today. Is there anything else before we wrap up?
I'm not seeing any other questions. I just want to thank you guys for an excellent session. Again, we'll be posting this out, and then we'll be sharing the recording to our broader field. So real quickly, I'm going to quickly share my own screen here and push this over. This was the 5th of our sessions, but if once we are done today, this afternoon, I'll go ahead and post on our blog. If you go to techcommunities.microsoft.com, we are the healthcare and life sciences blog. We'll have the recording of this event, and then the cleanse slides from Jason, the ones that we can show, we'll have those up. And we look for input from folks as moving forward, what they'd like to hear and see. As of this morning, management said they want to continue doing with some focus series for our field. So thank you very much to everybody who attended. And any last words, Jason?
No, just thanks everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you. And so everybody have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back again soon. Take care and ciao.